Welcome to the Retro Graveyard, the show where each week we take an old, discontinued piece of video game hardware back from the grave to give it a retrospective, and this week we're taking a look at the Game Boy Advance Classic. The Game Boy Advance, the successor to the original Game Boy line, which included the Color, was released in America in June of 2001. I would consider this to be the first major upgrade to the Game Boy line. It featured a total redesign, unlike any other Game Boy before it. This gave it room for a wider 3:2 aspect ratio display, coming in at a resolution of 240 by 180, up from a resolution of 160 by 144 on the Game Boy Colors. It's capable of displaying 512 colors simultaneously in what's called character mode, which is what games used most of the time. But there is also a bitmap mode, which could display 32,768 colors simultaneously, although it wasn't used that much because it was a little bit more intensive. And speaking of color, the console came in 6 original color variants, and a crap ton of other limited edition ones, store exclusive ones too. This is Indigo and Arctic Blue or Arctic Ice or something. Backed by a 32-bit, 16.8 MHz processor, the Game Boy Advance was a substantial upgrade from its predecessors, and it was the highest spec'd dedicated portable gaming console back in 2001. Its main competitors, the Neo Geo Pocket Color and the Wonderswan, just did not match its processing power. Back in 1996, gaming magazines like Electronic Gaming Monthly and Game Informer were reporting about a 32-bit successor to the Game Boy Color to be released in 1997. They actually described a lot of specs that turned out to be very similar to what the Game Boy Advance would have when it launched in 2001. But we didn't get anything similar in 1997, instead we got the Game Boy Color. So from this we can draw that the Game Boy Advance had quite the long development process from Nintendo, at least 6 years. This thing was really great. Out of all of the Game Boy line, this original Game Boy Advance was probably the most comfortable to hold. I definitely logged a lot of hours playing games on this, and I didn't ever get carpal tunnel or anything, so that's good. But I did go through a lot of AA's. That's right, this thing didn't have a lithium-ion pack like the Game Boy Advance SP and the Nintendo DS after it did. The AA's lasted for 15 hours, and then after that was it. You had to go buy new ones. Correction, 15 hours unless you need a worm light, because this screen is not backlit. So most of the time, if you're not sitting by a window or, don't have good lighting in the room you're playing in or something, playing at nighttime, playing in the car, you're going to need some kind of source of light on here, and that chew through batteries like mad. These two omissions seem ridiculous, like unthinkable now, but back in 2001, it was probably a necessary thing to cut to keep the price at $100 US. There were a lot of wonderful games for this device, a lot of them probably comparable to Super Nintendo games in terms of overall quality. Some of them were even Super Nintendo ports, like Yoshi's Island. Many of the games released for this console were in fact so good that they still have a life today in the form of games on the Wii U Virtual Console, if you're into paying for the same game multiple times. It's also completely backwards compatible with Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, even though they did stick out of the back like this. There were some interesting accessories for this device, like this wireless adapter which came with Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green. Only problem is, it came out in like 2004, which was pretty close to the end of this thing's life cycle, so not a lot of games were really supported by it. There's also something called the Play-Yan, an official Nintendo accessory that took SD cards and you could play back videos and photos and MP3 files on your Game Boy Advance. Seems like a really cool accessory. I want to actually get my hands on one and do a retrospective on that soon. And then there's the e-reader, which watch my video on it, you'd know all about, so I'll link that one, be sure to give it a watch. Here's something a lot of you may have forgotten about over the years. There's a line called Game Boy Advance Video, which held full resolution for this thing anyway, 240 by 160 videos on it, and they came preloaded with like Pokemon and Nickelodeon cartoons. There's Cartoon Network cartoons, and the cartridges generally held 40 minutes, so 2 episodes, 2 20-minute episodes. They cost $10 and the quality wasn't that bad. There's also 3 feature films released on them. I don't have one of those, but they were Shrek, Shrek 2, and Shark Tale. They were $20 each, and those movies all run for 90 minutes. Interestingly, they actually blocked the video cartridges from working on the Game Boy Player accessory for the GameCube, which is something I should probably do a video on too. But anyway guys, that's it for the Game Boy Advance. If you had one of these things, be sure to let me know what you thought of it in the comments, and be sure to check back for more Retro Graveyard. Subscribe so you don't miss any. Thanks for watching, guys.